The postmodern thinker Keith Jenkins offers an analogy for how history is practiced in a short book aimed at students. If I remember correctly, it runs like this. The historian hears leaves rustling and attempts to infer from that the size and shape of a tree. But, Jenkins argues, there is no tree. There is only the sound of rustling leaves. The most vocal part of the postmodern critique is that historians' reconstructions of the past are determined by structures of power in their own time. But for that critique to hold, it depends in large part on a claim that, as Jenkins' analogy suggests, there is nothing there, nothing that the historian can, in fact, reconstruct. No past as it actually happened. It is a claim that historians are not attempting a reconstruction of events as they happened at all, but they are reconstructing something else, something imagined, something postmodernists call the referent. But isn't referent just a synonym for the past? Because as any practicing historical researcher knows, we don't study the past, we study evidence. Jenkins' analogy is not a bad one for that process. The historian looks at traces, lines of brick in the ground, remains of tiles, working detritus. They call those primary sources, and they reconstruct from those what they think left those traces. They might be wrong, there might not be enough traces to say, but there was once a specific singular thing, the past, there to leave the traces behind. And we can look at the referent and just say, well, that, like primary sources for evidence, is just a technical word for the past. And that the postmodernist obsession with it is just an example of misunderstanding by people who are mostly philosophers with no practical experience of doing historical research. But I don't think that's so in this case. I think at a fundamental level, the referent and the past are quite different concepts, or at least they need to be if the postmodern critique as it was mounted in the 90s and early 2000s is to hold up. For the conventional historian, the past is singular, even when it is unknown. But the referent is not. The referent is imagined, and it must be multiple. It requires, in essence, different, contradictory things to have occurred at the same time. Yes, more than one thing happened. An idea you may find a little bizarre, but you already carry around in your head a conceptual equivalent of multiple futures, the idea of divergent timelines or multiverses.
Alright, so imagine there are multiple versions of Earth, one where the Nazis won World War II, one where Kennedy was never assassinated.
Oh, yeah, one more.
Imagine that this line represents time. Here's the present, 1985, the future, and the past. Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985. Alternate.
The Infinity Stones create what you experience as the flow of time. Remove one of the stones, and that flow splits. Now,
whether that is good science or not is largely irrelevant for our purposes. The point is that you can conceive of the future diverging when momentous decisions are made, because the idea is so widespread in popular culture. And so it must also be possible to conceive of the past converging when different decisions result in us ending up in the same place now. Okay, a concrete example. I'm recording this, so this is the past, or the referent, while the video that you're watching much later, so that's the evidence, or the primary source, from which you can make inferences about what happened here. But you only have access to that video, you are not present at the events itself. I have a piece of paper, I have a pen. I am going to write something on the piece of paper with the pen. Then I'm going to tell you that if I take that what's written on here is a number, and if I take that number and multiply it by itself, and then multiply it by itself again, and then by itself again, the answer is going to be 16. Now, I'm going to take a box of matches. And I am going to set fire to the piece of paper. So now the number that I wrote is going to be destroyed. And I have a very simple question for you. What number did I write on the piece of paper? Okay, here is the sum. You might be tempted to answer 2. That answer is going to be wrong. But why it is wrong depends on your disciplinary perspective, and so does the correct answer. Or even if there is a correct answer. The point is that there are multiple things, 4 of them, I could have written, and that statement about the answer being 16 would still be true. And none of it would have mattered. The world would be exactly the same today, regardless of which one I wrote. So is there any functional difference in this case between you not knowing which one I wrote and there being 4 different parallel versions of past events in which I wrote 4 different things on that paper, all of which converged in your present? For a mathematician, I used a sum for a reason, the answer is no. And as a result, they have no difficulty answering the question of what I wrote. The answer is 2 minus 2, 2j, and minus 2j. But for a historian who rejects postmodernism, that isn't a valid answer. I must have written one of those things. 3 of those are wrong. There is just no way to know which it is. There is a disciplinary difference in the kinds of answers mathematicians and historians accept. And that is precisely Jenkins' point, and the reason for using the term referent. 2 minus 2, 2j could be a perfectly valid answer. We could conceive of 4 converging parallel universes in which I took all of the possible actions that get us to this point. The disciplinary insistence that there is a singular answer, that only a singular answer is valid, and that we do not know the answer in this case, even though in a sense we do, is a construction, a conceptual framework, an imposition by the historian. It is a referent. And the postmodern point is that historians are not reconstructing the past. They are trying to reconstruct this artificial, singular, disciplinary construct.